Alright, so we're going to take a look at this Curious Ape video titled Theo Von, the Loneliest Comedian Alive.
Some people are born into love, into light, into a life that already makes sense. But others are born into darkness. And sometimes the only way out is to laugh. But before the fame, before the sold out shows and popular podcasts, before millions of people felt like they could relate to his struggles, there was just a lonely kid in Louisiana trying to make sense of his deck of cards.
Alright, so first thing that I'm wondering is Curious Ape trying to say that Theo Von isn't lonely still? Or is he saying that he's been lonely the entire time? Obviously, we just got into the video, but I've said this about Theo for a while. You know, he's the sad clown that we need in the world of comedy. Okay? And that sucks. Because a lot of times those people are very disposable. And I think that's what Theo is worried about, is being in such a place where they care, but they don't care enough. If that makes sense. Let's see what we got.
Born in March of 1980, Theo Von was the youngest of four, and it quickly became obvious that Theo was going to be the least of his family's worries. Because while he was a young boy longing for attention, his older sister was in the hospital needing surgery to save her life. It was the first time he was smacked in the face with the cold hard fact that he'd probably never get the attention he actually desired. And this would set the tone for the rest of his childhood. By his 10th birthday, his dad was already 80, and looking around at all his other friends who had normal dads, Theo wasn't just embarrassed, but he was becoming disconnected with his own reality.
One of the reasons...
Look, that's something that I feel like a lot of us had growing up, is embarrassment of our parents, right? We all felt a little bit of that. I was like, hey man, we're trying to fly from the nest. And the last thing I want to do is have my reputation stained by, you know, my mom's attitude or whatever, right? Or however they want to, your friends would perceive her, peers perceive your parents. And when you have a friend who has an old dad, you didn't really ever think of it like that. You're kind of like, okay. And Theo is kind of magnifying that whole thing of, yeah, I had an old dad. And it affected me differently than it has probably a lot of other people that had an old dad. You know, his mom wasn't really there too, but you know what I'm saying? It's like you find a thing to grasp onto.
Reasons also we didn't know each other very well was because I really judged him. You know, I really judged him for being so old. You know, other kids would make fun of him, and then I kind of made fun of him. I think maybe I was afraid to get to know him because I knew he was going to pass away. So it was probably like safer to not get to know him, you know?
I was hyper concerned with kind of image management because it's all I had left. You know, I'd try not to be seen around my family. I don't know, I was just hyper concerned with the only thing that I had that I still had.
He was embarrassed of them. He wanted to be perceived by, he wanted to have the reputation he cultivated where he was. It's no different than the kid who never wanted you to come to his house. Okay? We know why. We know why. And all that does is make you more curious as a friend. You're like, hey man, come on. Let's go to your house.
Still I had control over was my own image, really.
Withdrawing from his relationship with his dad, Theo started to put more emphasis on the one with his mom. But this relationship would only make him feel more alone, because while he was longing for a connection between them, she was too busy working odd jobs trying to keep the family alive. And even when they did have time together, in some ways, it only made things worse.
Yeah, my mother didn't look at me, right? If there were an emotional thing, she couldn't connect. Like, she almost had like an emotional autism.
Yes.
Like if it were physical, if I got hurt, she could help.
Right.
The second I got hurt. But if I'm sitting across from her feeling a certain way,
yes,
it doesn't even, it's like, she won't come to me.
Yeah.
She can't come to me. She couldn't hug me for more than like half a second.
See, a lot of us dealt with that as well. You know, a lot of us had that. And that's what makes Theo relatable. And that's why there's nothing wrong with being, you know, sort of the sad clown version of what you want to, that can be a funny person. But again, they're disposable to Hollywood, to the industry. Had Theo not took his career into his own hands and started a podcast and became friends with Joe Rogan and these people, he'd be struggling. If he was still attempting this, he'd be struggling. And that's just the facts of it. Because they don't, much like him with his father, Hollywood sees an expiration date on these people. How much can we get out of them in the amount of time that we're willing to use them? Because that's what it is. It's a sick game. It's disgusting. And, that's part of the Illuminati. And depending on how badly or how desperate you are to have a much different life than what was probably going to be, you're going to do what you can to get into the Illuminati, man. To sell your soul. And you have to wonder at this point, how many of them have done that already?
Second.
Okay. Theo wasn't just feeling disconnected emotionally, but he was starting to grow angry and resentful. His family was poor, his future seemed to have little opportunity, and his own mother couldn't even look him in the eyes. But even when things felt like they couldn't get any worse, Theo's dad would pass away when he was just 16 years old. Now, it's something he'd been mentally prepared.
Here's something we know about Theo too, is he was not somebody that got into comedy and immediately got traction or noticed for his style. It took a long time. I mean, up until he probably grew his hair out, nobody gave a shit. Right? He had that, No Offense or some shit special on Netflix back when Tom Segura was the main guy. Did anybody care then? No. Once he grew his hair out and became like the real life Joe Dirt, people started to care. But again, they only see him as a product. They don't see him as a human. So even though he is spilling all this shit about his real life and his real feelings, etc., do those people that watch his podcast actually give a shit? Do they? Because I feel like it's very easy for them to just change the channel, find the next guy to have a weird parasocial relationship with. It takes almost nothing. But we need this type of character, and I don't want them to be disposable. I don't like that. Because sometimes they have the greatest gift. Brody Stevens is a prime example of that. Somebody who was just so misunderstood in the industry, the Hollywood, mainstream, if you will. But man, that guy, he just got funny. He just was funny. And because the opportunities weren't there, they didn't work out or what have you, what are they, fucking holding a candlelight vigil now? For him? They don't do that. They don't care. Just on to the next one. And that is something that I think Theo was scared about. When he had his mental thing, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, and just didn't want to do the stand-up thing, didn't want to tour, didn't really like getting on stage. That's somebody who is not really into what they're doing, I think. They're doing it because they somehow stumbled into it and they found it to be the most, lucrative. And thank God he's got a podcast that he can rely on now, so he doesn't have to do that much stand-up, doesn't have to tour. He can tour when he wants to and how he wants to. But in the beginning, I'm sure it was awful. Dreadful. Let's hear some more.
Preparing for years, yet this still confirmed everything he had already thought. Life wasn't fair, and it wasn't getting any better, but the death of his father unlocked something that would change his life forever.
So did that kind of start your sense of humor
Yeah.
then, joking about your father? I mean, I know that's morbid,
Yes.
but kind of trying to make jokes at that age about your father passing away?
100%. Sometimes I think the reason I do comedy is because I wanted my mom to laugh or something when I was young, and I couldn't get her to laugh.
Yeah.
And so it spun out into this weird thing where that's what I was doing.
It was around this time Theo realized that a sense of humor could help him get through these dark periods in life. But it still didn't resolve the anger that was stuck inside him. And now that resentment was starting to build towards something else. Because if he couldn't get his own mother to laugh or look at him, then he was gonna have to find that attention somewhere else. But the idea of doing stand-up comedy was still a distant thought. There was, however, another option.
Either way, man, Theo, very funny guy, naturally. And I think that is something that gets stunted in a lot of people that try stand-up, is the ability to just still be funny, to feel naturally funny. Because you can tell when somebody's setting up a joke. You know, they switch it up for every city that they're in. It's not natural. So when you see this happen, and then you also see the industry kind of shit on them, like David Spade and Theo just did a movie and they can't sell it to anybody. Nobody was willing to like buy it from them. Why? It's because they don't care, bro. They don't get it. And they won't. But what I was more worried about when it comes to Theo is just the fact that he's, you know, probably pushing close to 45, 50 years old, and he is actually just a lonely guy. So he might take his openers and what have you with him when he travels, but there's no family. There's nobody waiting for him at home. And that can be an issue for a lot of these guys. You know, some of them really like the traveling and being away from home and shit. But Theo, you can tell he needs to be able to walk into a door and be greeted and be missed and be worried about. And that's fine. But how far is that going to take you in this genre of entertainment? Either way, guys, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.